Have you ever heard this quote? There is a rifle behind every blade of grass. This is commonly believed that gun owners actually prevented a mainland invasion from Japan during World War II. And today I'm going to talk about how interesting it is to think about the biggest unofficial militia in the world, being American gun owners, can influence another country's decision whether they should invade or not. But I also want to talk about the real reason that Japan did not invade, because I find this even more interesting, and kind of loop it back around how gun owners play an influence to a certain extent for other countries even to this day. I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you believe this is a real quote, or do you think it's just something that's kind of spread since the end of World War II? What do you think about the reasons that Japan actually didn't invade? Love to hear all of that down below. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So this actually started with Admiral Yamamoto, and he was the mastermind, if you will, behind the Pearl Harbor attacks. Now, Pearl Harbor, of course, is very important to this entire story. Essentially, what Japan was trying to do is try to land a blow so hard and devastating that the US would have to come to the table and negotiate. They knew that if the US decided not to take that approach, that they were basically going to lose the war, because the United States had already kind of been involved with this economic embargo and blockades since basically 1940. It actually started in 1939. That's when the US decided, hey, we're going to end our commercial treaty with the Japanese. In 1941, we had the Export Control Act, which said we're not going to sell them airplanes or airplane parts, fuel, and other things. Then we said, hey, in 1941, we're going to freeze all of their assets. And cutting off fuel was one of the biggest things here, because Japan only had reserves enough for 2 years. That's it. And the whole time they're kind of, creating this barrier around Japan. They started with the Sino-Japanese War in 1937, which is to some people like the unofficial beginning of World War II. Manchuria, Beijing, Guam, Wake Island, and the first ever aircraft carrier battle, if you will, in the Coral Sea, where they tried to take over the port of Moresby in Papua New Guinea, which failed. And they thought about taking over Australia. It was just too much of a logistical nightmare for them to be able to do it. Not only was the distance too great, but the area, Australia, is too big, and they were already spread out too thin as well between all of these different conquests and this barrier they were trying to create around the mainland. So they decided that Pearl Harbor was their only shot in order to bring the US back to the negotiating table. Fortunately for us, though, our aircraft carriers were not in the harbor that day. Now, they did a lot of damage and destruction, of course, to our battleships, which was kind of still seen at that time as the might of any kind of navy. Did a lot of damage to airplanes and stuff. They burned it's estimated like 0.17% of their fuel during this entire attack. I think it's estimated like 3 million gallons of fuel was used, and I don't even think that's including the airplanes. So they felt like their back was against the wall, and because of their aggression, the US cut them off, and they felt like this was their only opportunity really to bring us to the table. And of course, well, that didn't work. And by the time Midway happened, they were on the defensive the entire time afterwards. So to put it simply, not only was Pearl Harbor actually not the deterrent they were looking for, but also it just stretched them even thinner, because now technically they're fighting a war on two fronts. The entire time World War II is going on, they're still having battles with China. Now you have the US that's coming from the other side. We used Australia as a huge kind of jumping off point for a lot of our counterattacks, and it put them in a position where they could no longer win. And Yamamoto knew this. He knew like the first 6 months to a year, they could potentially hold off the US maybe, but after that, he was very unsure about this. So they logistically could not do it. They couldn't keep up with production either, by the way. We outproduced them. There's one interesting statistic that by the end of World War II, we had produced 100 aircraft carriers, which is freaking impressive, right? Considering from 1941, the end of 1941, so let's just say 42 to 45, we made 100 of them. Japan only was able to muster up 25. That's a good representation of their military power compared to ours at the time. But what about gun owners? Did they have any kind of influence into Japan's decision not to invade us? Well, not really. This is thought to be because Yamamoto, I guess, his personal beliefs, and having spent time in the US, he knew that American gun owners were a big part of culture. Guns were a big part of our culture, but he also knew our military might as well. So while it's not in any of his writings, none of the interviews that he did after the war, there's no reason to believe that he ever said that, it still makes a really powerful stance that gun owners and gun ownership is a huge deterrent to countries, not only being able to take over their own people, but to be able to take over other countries as well. An armed society is a polite one, but it's also one that you can't easily take over. And make no mistake about it, private gun ownership in the United States, we are the biggest unofficial militia in the world, right? There's 120 guns per 100 people. And you don't even have to agree with the type of guns that we are allowed to have in the United States. You could be totally opposed to it, but never forget that gun ownership is what keeps governments at bay. Hitler, who was one of the ones that actually expanded gun rights for people that agreed with him, but also banned gun ownership for Jews and other political activists that opposed that regime. Mussolini, very strict gun laws. Stalin, you would be sent to the gulag or hung in the Soviet Union if you owned a gun privately, and even to modern day, right? Mao in China, Little Rocket Man in North Korea, the list goes on and on. Anytime you can control the population and control their access to guns, you are in a much better position to have full power, and that's what all of these people have done. So no, gun owners didn't necessarily prevent the invasion, but make no mistake about it, other countries definitely know that private gun ownership is a massive deterrent, and not only to other countries, but primarily to our own. So there you go. Pretty interesting story, and I'd love to hear your opinion. Is this something you believed your entire life? Maybe you still believe it. Whatever your opinion is, leave that down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one, and as always, hold 'em down.